Principalists are one of the two main political factions in Iran, but they have dominated two of three powers, the Judiciary and Legislature, and they stand a good chance of taking over the third power too. Sure enough, one of the candidates for the executive or presidency is Ibrahim Raisi himself, head of the judiciary since 2019. As for parliament, over 80% of its 290 seats were taken by Principalists in February 2020. The party also dominates the Assembly of Experts, although Tehran City Council members are all 21 of them reformist. Principalist candidates for upcoming presidential elections were selected 5-2, and the remaining two were made up of one reformist and one moderate. But are they still? As the people care less and less about the names reformist and principalist, those names lose importance also to candidates who depend on respective camps for a win. In fact, most presidential candidates are distancing themselves from existing party affiliations. However, both camps stand, and in this election special, we'll be looking at Principalists. So for that, stay with me, Leila Faramarzi, on Iran Today. What situation does the party find itself in today, considering its political, economic, and cultural tendencies? But first, what are its approaches, background, and branches? Birthed by the right or right wing, Principalists believe politics and religion are inseparable. They advocate a minimized government role in the economy and are skeptical of the globalization of economy, because they think the liberal international economic system disproportionately benefits the West. This outlook explains their more rigid approach also to foreign policy, lest they give up the country's hard-earned independence. Mr. Hanif Ghaffari is international editor for the Jame Jam and Resalat papers. He mentions some foreign policy challenges the new government would face given the state of affairs it inherits. Whatever problems might have arisen from the Rouhani administration's foreign policy, wouldn't you say that now with the Vienna talks, they're putting it right, they're putting the eggs back into the basket?
Joe
Biden and the Democrats want to keep in place hundreds of sanctions against Iran, as U.S. State Secretary Antony Blinken has also acknowledged. In other words, they don't want to disrupt the anti-Iran sanctions structure. The Vienna talks are basically concerned with suspending a portion of the sanctions. But the truth of the matter is that the US is keeping its fundamental inhumane sanctions against us, like the ILSA that Congress has passed, or the restrictions on Iran's access to U-turn and transactions with foreign currencies. All these have to be removed before we can verify Washington's commitment to the JCPOA and announce that it has indeed lifted all sanctions against us.
So what is the state of affairs a future government will inherit? The answer can be found in taking a look at Iran's present status on the international scene in comparison to former terms since the revolution.
Speaking of tactics, we've seen that the Iranian government relied too heavily on diplomacy with Europe. Even after the US withdrew from the JCPOA, we waited on the EU for a couple of years to see what solution they would suggest to compensate for that. In the meantime, the Islamic Republic and the Islamic Revolution's power was made evident, especially in the region, because of its major policies, which aren't necessarily related to the governments in office.
In other words, a change of government shouldn't greatly affect the country's international standing because the system remains steadfast. However, it was against the backdrop and background of a traditionalist establishment that the reformist and moderate Khatami and Rouhani governments felt a need for dialogue and dealings with the world, both West and East. The 2015 JCPOA signing with Western powers plus China and Russia was to boost Iran's foreign trade and therefore its economy. It was the US pullout from the deal and reimpositioning and reinforcing sanctions that ruined all prospect. But then Principalists make a point that it was the moderate Rouhani government that shouldn't have set its heart fully on the West.
We ignored some capacities in our foreign policy. We didn't pay them due attention, like our regional diplomacy, diplomacy with the East, or even diplomacy with Latin America. That means that there are capacities that our country could have taken advantage of, but didn't.
That also answers the question of what foreign policy priorities any new government must decide for itself. Now, envisaging the Principalists winning the presidency, their policies will draw on what they stand for, their background as a whole, and how they've split and spread out into an extended family, to name some main branches. The term Principalist is an umbrella term to refer to a variety of right-leaning parties. While reformists seek religious and constitutional reforms in the country, Principalists at their extreme believe in absolute religious authority and that it be legally enforced. As for rigidity in foreign policy,
Principalist groups keep up a closer guard against the US and its allies. They also believe that foreign policy shouldn't rely exclusively on the strategy of removing the sanctions. They follow the formula of neutralizing the effects of the sanctions by relying on domestic capabilities, something that must be applied to our economy.
Whether they ask for it or not, some candidates are backed by more than one group, and allegiances often shift, as they have with upcoming elections. Some prominent Principalist groups to award that support are the United Front of Principalists. That's the biggest group of its affiliation which supports a free market economy. The group is supported by the establishment's backbone. That is influential clerics, the IRGC, or Revolution Guards Corps, and major bazaar merchants. Who endorsed Raisi as the top pick in the 2021 elections was the Unity Council of Principalists, according to its spokesperson, who is the former Foreign Minister Manucher Mottaki. Alongside the United Front of Principalists was the Principalist Pervasive Coalition as one of the top two Principalist coalitions for the 2008 Iranian legislative elections. It was in the run-up to those elections that Principalists split from the United Front of Principalists because they believed the pro-Ahmadinejad sweet scent of service faction was given too many top positions on electoral lists. The coalition is believed to have been backed by Mohammad Baqir Ghalibaf, former Tehran mayor who is now House Speaker, Mohsen Rezai, former head of the IRGC and today's presidential candidate, and Ali Larijani, former nuclear negotiator and 2021 presidential hopeful, who was not vetted by the upper house. I had mentioned Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. He is the former Principalist president who took office for a second term. Our guest has a cautious praise for his external policy, however.
We
saw that during Mr. Ahmadinejad's terms, establishing ties with the nations that the US considered its backyard was on the top of the agenda. Or, for instance, during Mr. Khatami's or Mr. Rouhani's terms, de-escalation of tensions became the primary tactical objective. In my opinion, every single approach has had its weaknesses and benefits for our foreign policy.
Iran's most right-leaning party is the Front of Islamic Revolution Stability. It was established as an electoral list for the 2012 legislative election and is partly made up of former ministers of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. In 2013, the front supported Saeed Jalili for president. The front's parliament members include Amir Hossein Qazizadeh Hashemi. Now, you do recall both names, Jalili and Hashemi, are running for office this weekend, alongside Raisi, Rezai, Zakani, Mehralizadeh, and Hemmati. Now, while the people are tired of an unemployment rate of over 11% and an inflation rate of 40-50% and blame it on the incumbent moderate government, Principalists do, after all, tend to support protectionist economic policies and significant state involvement in society. That's all we have time for in this episode. We can continue the discussion in our next 10 minutes on Friday elections. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.